Live and we're live.
Ah,
Here we go. All right. How's everybody going? Welcome back to another We Build Black workshop. My name is Devin Jackson. I'm here with Jillian Ford. She's an AWS solution architect over at Amazon, and she's going to break down how easy serverless AWS can be. So I'm going to kick it over to her and take it away.
all right. I am so fired up to be here with you all. Thank you for showing up on a Tuesday at 5 o'clock to come hang out with me and talk about serverless. Let me share my screen. I've got some slides and I've got some other good stuff to share with you. Let's see. All right. All right. So yeah, Devin told me, and the main theme here of today is serverless, but I also want to contrast it with virtual machines and containers, and particularly which do you choose? This is a question that I get a lot. I get asked a lot, and so from my experience, I want to break this down and make it simple for you to be able to choose this. So before I actually get started with the topic, I want to get a sense of what it is that you're looking to get out of today. So if you can type in the chat, what it is that you want to get out of today, so Devin can share it with me and I can make sure that I deliver that for you today. Devin, do we have anything coming up in the chat?
Looking around. I also think there's a little bit of a delay between, what we say and she said, okay, so somebody said, understanding why companies are choosing serverless versus containers.
Okay, awesome. Definitely going to address that. You're in the right place.
Introduction to AWS and what it is. Yeah, I think she can definitely sum that up pretty easily. Let me see. Yep. That's understanding why people are choosing it.
Okay.
That's pretty for the most part. That seems to be the consensus. People want to know why.
I want to know why. They came to the right place. Yes. All right. So, and then before I get into that, I mean, there's people want to know why is AWS, and you might also be wondering with my job title, Solutions Architect, like what the hell is that? It's especially because it's not a very common job title in the tech industry. So I want to break down both of these for you. So my name is Jillian, and I can summarize what a solutions architect is with this one sentence. I help companies build their business on AWS. I've been working with companies with AWS of all different sizes. I've worked with Fortune 500 companies, I've worked with small, medium businesses, and now at AWS, I focus on working with startups to help their business grow. And particularly why I'm here and why I'm so fired up to be here with you all is that I want to see not only just more diversity in tech, I want to see you be able to be the CEO, CTO. I want to see more diversity at the top. And so if my knowledge that I use to be able to help companies scale can help you accelerate your career, maybe that's leading your own company one day, leading a team of other engineers, other developers, other business people in the industry. If you're out there leading it by using this knowledge, then I feel fulfilled that I'm for being here, and I just feel more fulfilled as a person because that's what gets me really fired up with the knowledge that I've got. So what is Amazon Web? Oh, maybe I should remove that so you can see. There we go. So what is Amazon Web Services? It is the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform. Let me break down what the cloud is. Cloud computing provides the on-demand delivery of IT resources with pay-as-you-go pricing. You no longer have to buy, own, and maintain data centers, servers. You can simply provision web services like databases, compute on an as-needed basis with pay-as-you-go pricing. And as a result of cloud computing, it now becomes a lot easier and more cost effective for you to do things like architecting for high availability, for disaster recovery, architecting for security, and even being able to experiment. So if your team wants to be able to create a new experiment, or maybe you've got your own side project, or you want to start a business, you want to do it in the cloud because it's going to be able to help you be able to scale securely, all around the world, much faster than if you were to go out and get a contract for a lease for a building to be able to have your own data center. So one thing I really hope that you come away with today is that if you aren't using the cloud right now and you're not familiar with cloud computing fundamentals, after this talk, go and start to learn more about cloud computing. Why? There's a good chance that the company you're working at today is using the cloud. If they're not, there's a good chance the next company that you're going to work at is using the cloud. And if they're not, there's a good chance that the next company, or if you want to start your own company one day or start your own side project, you better be doing it in the cloud because it's going to be way, way too expensive for you to bring your product to market and really test, does the product even want this? If you were to go and provision a data center yourself, whereas with the cloud, you can literally pay for what you use, get something up really quickly. Oh, what's going on? Okay, there we go. Now, the reason why I'm actually able to be here today and give you this talk and actually compare the different virtual machines versus serverless versus containers is because there have been changes to architectural patterns which have impacted how it is that we build applications today in order to be able to scale and get our products to customers faster. It all started out with the monolith, and you might still be using the monolith today, and that's okay. So a monolithic application is, think about your Ruby on Rails, your Python Django application. It's all your code base is all in one application and you build it and deploy it all at once. This isn't bad. It works well, especially when you're like a small team or you're just starting out. However, there comes a point where you reach a certain scale that fast monolith that allowed you to be able to get products to your customers quickly isn't so fast anymore. You need a way to be able to continue to build and deploy code quickly that also keeps up with the pace of innovation at your company and also allows you as a developer to be able to build quickly and not have to be waiting on some other team that is still, has merged code into production. This is where microservices comes in. Microservices allows you to independently run applications without having one application impact another application. So this distinction between the monolith and the microservices really sets the stage to why it is that we now have all these different compute options. So, and it also sets the stage for specifically when you would use virtual machines. You're going to want to use virtual machines for two scenarios. You might be in an instance where you want to have full control over the server. Maybe you're someone who wants to be able to perform diagnostics, tuning, or you might have some very specific customizations that you want to do for that server. Another example could be you already have an existing monolithic web application, like you got your Ruby on Rails, you got your Python Django app, and right now it's working. You're able to get code out quickly to your customers just fine. Like the example that I see with startups is that some are still at the early stages where the monolith is still being able to get them to get their product to market and to their customers really quickly. So if you're still in that stage, a monolith, or maybe you're just starting to learn the code, because I get it. If you might be here right now because maybe you're still at like the super early stages of your own career in tech. And so in that case, when you first start to code, you're going to be using a monolithic web application because starting to think in microservices is just an even harder concept to grasp on top of learning a new language and learning, different web frameworks at the same time. In terms of how do you actually use virtual machines, within the AWS cloud, there are two ways that you can use the virtual machines. Amazon EC2 is your bare bones virtual machine. You can run a web app on it, you can run a database on it. If you wanted to run a web application, the simplest way to do it on AWS is with AWS Elastic Beanstalk. All you need to do is just upload your code to Elastic Beanstalk, and it takes care of the actual auto scaling groups, making sure that your load balancer points to the servers, you're actually making sure that you have enough, auto scaling, like, the security groups for like all your firewall rules. Now, you might be hearing this and also hearing me talk about, having control of the server, like diagnostics and tuning, and that might kind of freak you out, which I'm raising my hand for that case, because I definitely would not want to be the person responsible having to fine tune and dial up a virtual machine. So if that's you, I'm with you. Serverless to the rescue. So what is serverless? Serverless allows you to provision servers without actually having to manage servers. Doesn't mean that there are no servers. It simply means that whoever is the provider of those servers is managing them on your behalf. So if you are using serverless in AWS, that means that AWS is managing those servers for you. You are just responsible for your application code. And I'll show you an example later on. With serverless, you get automatic scaling, high availability, and security right out of the box. You don't actually have to think about all the different rules that you have to otherwise create back in the virtual machine world of being able to set those up. And you also, with serverless, pay for what you use. So that compute time is the only of running your code is the only amount of time that you pay for serverless. Whereas in the virtual machine world, you're paying for all of the time that that server is on. So there might not be anyone actually hitting your servers, but you're still getting charged for it. A couple scenarios of when you would use serverless. Use serverless if you're starting from scratch. This could be maybe you're starting an application from scratch, or even if you're just learning to code and you're trying to break into the industry, I would start to learn serverless right away, because it's going to be able to help you build your own application faster, and you don't have to actually worry about any of the fine tuning, the actual, diagnostics, auto scaling that you would if you were to have to provision your own virtual machines. You can use serverless if you can break your code up into smaller pieces of business logic, and for short running applications. So within the AWS cloud, the flagship AWS serverless service is called AWS Lambda. Lambda allows you to provision compute without actually having to manage servers. So in this case, with Lambda, you can run your each Lambda function runs for up to 15 minutes. So you'd want to take advantage of Lambda, you'd want to break up your code into small pieces that don't run longer than 15 minutes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like your whole application, you can't run your application if it would take longer than 15 minutes to run. All that means is that you would just break up your code into multiple Lambda functions. And if you think back to that microservices example, it lends itself really well, because microservices are, each service is independent of one another. And it's just, they focus on one very small task. So now this might help you see that like serverless and microservices just like blend together really well. Like your favorite cocktail. And then the last piece of when you use serverless is if you want to focus on your business and data processing logic and less on figuring out infrastructure, which raising my hand here because that's the camp that I would be in if I were to create my own application. All right, now it's time to show you a little bit of a demo of what a serverless application looks like. So the website that I'm going to show you, I'll show you it in a second, but this is what the front end of the application is. All it is that the front end is using a open source framework called AWS Amplify. Amplify simplifies the process of utilizing a modern web or mobile application for the cloud. What I also really like about it is that, especially if you're someone who's new to the cloud, this is a great place to get started to build your own application because it abstracts you having to actually know these AWS services, and there are over 170 right now, which is, and they're going to continue to grow. So don't worry, you don't have to know all of them. Amplify will abstract you having to know the names of the services in order to be able to get the job done. So for example, if you want to be able to securely log in, authenticate users to your application, you don't have to say, hey, what's the service that AWS has that does that? Instead, you can look up the construct of how do I use authentication, and there's even like a command line. It's like AWS add auth, because there's a CLI for Amplify. And literally within a couple of steps, you're going to be able to provision authentication in your app and not have to worry about underlying details of this AWS service that does authentication. The backend for this application that I'm going to show you in a second is as follows. Again, all this is serverless. Amazon API Gateway simplifies the process of creating an API. It has other features as well, like if you wanted to create an API that would actually meter, and so if you had to like charge your customers to use your API, think about like like the weather API, like they actually charge you, like I guess based on requests or something to use it. So if that's something that you want to build an API to do, that's just one of the many features that you can use API Gateway for, aside it being just really simple, really making it simple to create an API. So your front end is going to call then the Amazon API Gateway endpoint URL. That is then going to be trigger AWS Lambda, which is the serverless compute. That's going to be your Python, your Ruby, your Node.js code. And this function here in this application is going to then be doing some processing and writing data into DynamoDB. So let me tell you more about what this application is, and that'll help put into perspective. Actually, before I do that, I just want to show you, there's a link that you're going to be able to access. This is a public URL. If you want to get hands-on, step-by-step with what some serverless applications and learn more about serverless, this is the workshop that you could go through. It's self-paced. It's got a bunch of different instructions. And what I also like is that there are a lot of different modules that showcase different use cases for serverless. So it's really great. It's worth checking out. And that's really, this is what I'm using to show you just what some instances of serverless could look like. So this is the scenario of this demo here is that we are a ride, a theme park company. And so we're trying to, create this, we've got this virtual magical theme park. And here we have all of the actual information about the theme park itself. So there's handicap stations, we've got the ticket booth, and all these different attractions. So going back to the architecture diagram, DynamoDB here, which is Amazon's NoSQL database. It's Amazon's flagship NoSQL database. It is really meant for scale, fast read and writes. So DynamoDB is storing the latitude and longitude of all of these. Let me scale out so it's easier to see. It's storing like the latitude and longitude of all of like the reference points on the map of this theme park. So like where's the handicap station? Where's the restroom? All right, so now I'm gonna walk you through just like some Lambda code of what it looks like. And I wanted to just show you this because I said in the earlier slide about how Lambda is, you want to think about breaking up your code into small pieces. So I want to just show you an example so you have an idea of like, what does that look like? And kind of more about like, what does a Lambda application look like? So this is a portion of the workflow of the code that I'm going to show you. Unfortunately, I can't demo this for you because it's a really cool demo, but I can't because how it works is that I don't have a green screen, but the actual demo itself is, imagine there was like a green screen behind me, and what it does is you take a picture and then it takes away the green screen, and then it repurposes like a new background. I don't have a green screen, so I'm just going to show you the code and you're going to have to imagine it. But that just is, so this kind of workflow of like being able to, take an image, kind of do some processing on it is another example of what you could use serverless for. And before I also jump to the code, I also want to call out that serverless architectures are event driven. What that means is that based on a application event, that could be putting a file, into storage. So here in AWS, object storage, where you'll be putting your front end code, your images, your videos, that's going to be stored in Amazon S3. So if you're maybe putting an object, in Amazon S3, or maybe you're putting it, you're writing to a database, you're receiving a notification. Any of those kinds of events are what will trigger your Lambda, your serverless application. Now, let me go walk through just some code, and I want you to, and this is less about what the code does, but more for you to kind of see just how short this is, so you can wrap your head around thinking about breaking up your code into small pieces. So when you write your actual serverless applications, you get an idea of like, thinking about, okay, this Lambda function only does one thing, instead of writing everything and just as you would if you were to do like a monolithic web application. So literally, this is part of this workflow. This function is part of this Lambda code walkthrough flow of actually being able to create a file, of getting an image, getting rid of like that green screen background, doing some other processing, and returning a new image to the front end. So this is just one of the Lambda functions in that workflow. So, and literally all this does is like, it takes a file, to S3, up from S3. So yeah, we're going to upload the file to S3. And now in this scale image function, there's a lot of other processing that we're starting to do with that image. Like, we're getting the actual size of the image. Here, if we scroll down, this is getting into the minutia of like what it actually does. But I just want you to see, like, read in the file, resize the image. There's just literally, it's less than 200 lines of code, and that's just one Lambda function. This whole file right here is one Lambda function. Okay. Now the next part of the application that I want to show you is this. So, and the point of what I've been showing you this is that I want to show you some other scenarios of when you'd be using serverless. So in this scenario, imagine, it's like you go to Disneyland, that you've got your wristband on, and you want to understand how long the wait time is for each ride. So, and also other like stats about like your trip there. So all of those stats are then being streamed in through from the wristband into Amazon Kinesis Firehose. Kinesis Firehose is a serverless service, so it allows you to be able to stream in data, especially real-time data. So it actually is able to auto scale, the shards, the amount of data that's coming in automatically without you having to provision that yourself. So it scales up and down, and all that data is going to be written into and stored in S3 for storage. From there, Amazon, I've created a dashboard in Amazon QuickSight, which is a business intelligence tool, and just shows some park stats. So here's the actual dashboard. So I literally just took within QuickSight, it automatically, you can populate the data from S3, and you can already start to see some stats about the site based on this simulated wristband. So about how many riders there were, where the riders were from. So this whole kind of analytical, real-time analytics or batch analytics workload, you could also do as a serverless application. And just with this simulated Kinesis Firehose, this simulation simulated about 70,000 visitors across a 12-hour time period. So you can imagine that like Kinesis is, I mean, you could scale to even more than that if you really wanted to, but Kinesis is meant to be able to scale, you could use it for like click streams or something, and, real-time kind of serverless analytics. And that's another example of a serverless application. All right. So now we're going on to containers. So I do want, a little bit of intro on what, containers, since some of you might not be familiar with containers. So a container is a standard unit of software that packages up code and all of its dependencies so the application runs quickly and reliably from one computing environment to another. Containers and virtual machines have similar resource isolation and allocation benefits, but they function differently because containers virtualize the operating system instead of hardware. Containers are more portable and efficient than virtual machines. So when would you use containers? Well, one, maybe your application can't run serverless. You might need to have a long-running application. Maybe it's like a really long running like compute job. Maybe your application needs to expand to other environments. Like you need to actually have some compute that's like, you need to have a long-running compute application that's also in a certain environment that's not in the cloud. Like maybe it's in a genomics lab or, in a factory floor. And the last instance would be if you're experienced with Docker, then it also makes sense for you to use containers. And if you want to use containers, you can even run containers serverlessly. AWS Fargate allows you to be able to run containers without having to manage the actual EC2 instances and the actual virtual machines to run those containers. Within AWS, it works with two orchestrators, Amazon ECS, which is Amazon's own Docker container orchestrator, and Amazon EKS, which is Amazon's managed orchestrator of Kubernetes. Fargate allows the right amount of compute, eliminating the need to choose instances and scale cluster capacity. So because it's serverless, you only pay for the resources required to run your containers. So there's no over provisioning and paying for additional servers to run those actual jobs. Now, at the heart of this decision is really recognizing the strengths of your team and getting your product out to market as fast as possible. So even though, and that's really and I see customers who are successful with all approaches. It's not really about like, oh, this is like the fastest way or the only way to do it, or just because I spent more time talking about serverless, and serverless is like, you don't have to provision servers, doesn't necessarily mean that it might not be the right approach for you now. So really whatever allows you, whether that's the company you're at, or maybe you're in a startup, or maybe you're going to start your own company, whatever allows you to get your product out as fast as possible is the right decision for you. So the resources that I mentioned, first this is the URL. Devin has it and will post it in the chat for you. This is the link to the workshop that I somewhat went over, but just go do some of the code examples. It's really great. It shows you other scenarios that you can, that kind of help wrap your mind around, like, what are some other examples of when you do serverless. I tried to show some of those today. And if you're someone who has not used the cloud before, you don't have experience in the cloud, AWS has free videos. They're training resources by our training and certification team that you can watch self-pace to be able to learn more about cloud computing fundamentals. I definitely recommend you, at some point in your career, whether it's for your job right now, for your next job, for the company you're going to start, to learn more about the cloud. It's going to be able to help you just go so much faster. And my favorite part of this is that we are hiring. And when I told the recruiting team at Amazon that I was going to come here to talk to you and that you were going to show up on a Tuesday night to learn about virtual machine serverless and containers, they got so excited that they created a special landing page just for you. So to make sure that if you want to work at Amazon, your resume gets noticed and it doesn't slip through the cracks. So there are 4 easy steps that you have to do if you are interested in working at Amazon. And that's something I can tell you more about my job in the Q&A, or and what the team that I'm working on does, if you are all interested. So 4 steps are: go to this URL. The team that created this is the Startup Solutions Architecture team. So there's information about what it is like to work with startups, what it's like to work on my team. But there's also, if there's other jobs within AWS that you are interested in, there's also a link to be able to apply to those. So you're going to go to that URL, find the job you like. This part's really important. Step 3, add the keyword "We Build Black" to the top of your resume. The recruiters are going to be looking for that keyword to be able to find you from the crowd. And then you just apply, and that's it. So now let's have some questions.
Awesome. Just so everybody knows, those links that Jillian was referring to earlier are actually in the description. So you can go check those out there. Big thank you to Jillian for putting this together, giving the opportunity. I see people in the chat super hype about the job opportunity. You know,
Yes.
we are here for y'all to grow, network, and get this money. You know what I mean?
That's right.
That's exactly
That's right. Yeah. I want to see CEOs, CTOs, leaders of the team being my teammates. You know, my team's hiring, so that's also why I'm also fired up to have you apply to work at Amazon.
Awesome. So let me read off some of these questions. There's some really good questions in here. So the first one is from Errol Marklin.
Errol, okay.
How does AWS manage containers? And in some of these questions you may have answered, maybe you want to kind of like go dive in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so the actual management of the containers, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But yeah, but
if these aren't like any
worry about it, but if it's something that like with the cloud, you can really control your own destiny. And I mean, AWS is like Lego pieces. So if you're someone who has like, you want to have that control of those containers and have specific requirements, you can do that. You don't have to go serverless. The option's there for you.
Awesome. So I think Dustin Maxwell Wilson, he got very specific with his question.
Okay.
But it sounds like to me, he's an ML specialist, and he would
Awesome.
like to know if serverless has some uses for machine learning. Is this at all possible?
Yeah, there are. There's even, you know what? Let me send it to you. Let me find it to you, Devin, and send it to you. And you can maybe like, I don't know if you have a Slack group or an email or something for the whole group. I can send it, because there is even like, there's someone on my team actually recently wrote a blog post about how you can use, so the service that allows you to orchestrate multiple serverless functions in a workflow is called AWS step functions. And so you can even use step functions for your machine learning process.
Dope. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, Dustin, if you want to join the chat, I'll actually find you after she sends that to me,
Yeah.
and then I'll actually send that to you afterwards. So let me see, what other questions do we have here? How secure is AWS for starting up a company, and can your data be hacked on the AWS cloud? I mean, I don't know if you really know that deep in terms like data.
So security is our top priority. I mean, it is job zero at Amazon. We take absolutely, like the highest security measurements to be secure, and also to be and follow various different compliance policies that are out there in the industry as well. So by far, it is way more secure to be in the cloud than it would be in your own data center. I mean, that's why you have companies like Capital One, Netflix, that run their applications in AWS instead of in their own data centers. Even the government too. There are a lot of government entities that you choose to run their applications in AWS than in their own than on their own. And so with AWS, you also there are a variety of tools, because I said earlier that like there's over 170 services within AWS, and which can sound daunting, and where do you get started? But a lot of those but there's also a lot of security services. So while you have the freedom to be able to build your application as you'd like in AWS, there's also a lot of services that are there to help it make it as easy for you as possible to secure applications. And of course, there's always encryption. You can bring your own encryption keys, or if you want AWS to offload that work for you, AWS has managed encryption keys that it can manage on your behalf.
Absolutely. And I'll definitely like back that myself as well. Just from a perspective as, an engineer who's built multiple projects, you definitely, if you are not a security engineer and this isn't like your job, I highly advise you to essentially use these tools that make it much easier for you. AWS is obviously much more equipped to handle this than you as, a singular developer. But of course, if you feel like you have the chops to get down and make a custom solution, then sure, go get to it. But for most of us, me included, that do not have that experience, this is definitely a much better option.
That's exactly the point. I mean, like, you have the option if you want to build some things yourself, but like something like authentication, making sure that it's like secure. I mean, like, why would you, unless you really want to be able to, geek out on like making, really secure authentication, you don't have to build it yourself. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, that's why there are there is the cloud to be able to make it as easy for you as possible to incorporate that into your application with the developer in mind, who's the person who's like, I don't know anything about, I don't want to have to think about, actually writing my own custom authentication. I just want it to work and be able to use it and read
Absolutely.
an API and be able to actually put it into my code.
I think you struck a chord with a lot of developers. I know me for one, I absolutely hate every time I make a project that I have to figure out how to build the whole, sign in, register, and
Oh, yeah.
dude, just give me a service. Just give me a service.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So yeah, next question. At what point does it not make sense to use AWS? Like, is there a certain amount of traffic where it maybe makes more sense to pay monthly for a dedicated server? Or does it just make sense all the time?
Okay. So when you're also, one thing that a lot of people don't think about, but they have to think about when they're thinking like, do I use the cloud or do I use like create it my own, build it myself, is the opportunity cost and the actual total cost of ownership. So the cloud, we have, we've been, we started this in order to be able to scale Amazon.com. So if you think about that, I mean, over a decade of experience of being able to build highly scalable applications that can scale for all over the world and for all different kinds of traffic spikes. Now, and making sure it's secure. So we've packaged all of that experience to be able to provide services that can make it as easy for you to be able to get up and running securely as fast as possible. Now, so if you're also thinking about, okay, if I want to do it myself, you also have to evaluate, okay, the cost of, you've got to lease a building and finding, it's funny because I know someone else on my team who worked on he had his own startup before coming to AWS. He was in like the Bitcoin data center business, which means you've got to like not only find a specific building that you can then think about that has like the actual cooling aerodynamic flow, because you don't want those servers to overheat. You need people to be able to secure those servers. You need to be able to, build your data centers for fault tolerance. So it's not just one building you're talking about. You need, many more, because what happens if that, box, goes away? What happens if there's if there's a hurricane or there's some other, natural disaster that happens? Well, you have to be able to architect your application so you can fail over to another data center, to other servers. And AWS has already done that heavy lifting for you. So there's like a lot that you already get out of the box by using the cloud. So you also have to take into account like the time it would take to and these are all things too that aren't really going to help your customers. Like your customers don't care that you found a lease to a building, that you've provisioned servers, and that you got a lease for another data center in a different reason, and that you found that it was in a plane that couldn't get hurricanes or something. They just want to make sure that your application, that they can buy your product. So those are all things that you have to also take into account when you're deciding, to really evaluate the total cost of running your application.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree. All right. So another question. This is actually pretty interesting.
Okay.
What is the future of backend framework skills as backend devs in general grow with serverlessness? Like, I guess that sounds like pretty much is another question here it's pretty much similar. It sounds to me that like, what are the compatible skills alongside serverless tools, right? Like, what do you need to pick up to be good at serverless, right?
So AWS is built with the developer first mentality. So if you specialize in Python, in Node, in Ruby, like those skills are transferable. So it's not like you would have to learn new skills that you're not already learning as a back-end developer. You just now need to learn how you can apply those skills to the cloud.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. So one question from me, I'm going to be a little bit selfish here and get this off,
Yeah,
but um, would you recommend starting your app as serverless or starting monolithic and transitioning over?
so you can still have a monolithic application that is a lot of different. Well, so I mean, if you were starting an application from scratch, I would personally start with serverless. I mean, like there's unless you have like really specific, like I guess in that slide, like if you have really specific compute needs, like or you just don't use serverless. I mean, don't then go ahead
Yeah.
and create a serverless application. Like if you've got really, but if it's like a web application, um, I
Mhm.
mean, if it works serverless for the pattern, like go for it. You just have to then think about the constraints of like, you know, of being able to make sure your code is like broken up into small pieces.
Mhm.
You know,
So pretty
so
much keep it serverless until it seems like it's overkill.
no. Well, so or serverless is able to scale.
Mm.
It automatically scales to your load. So there doesn't come a point where like you can't have like too much traffic. It's
Right, right, right.
meant to scale. It's more of like if serverless doesn't fit the needs of
Mm.
your application requirements, then don't use serverless. So like if you have like I mean maybe like long running like batch compute jobs or something as an example,
Mhm.
you know, and you can't you cannot break it up into small pieces of code. Then
Got it.
yeah, that's an
At
example.
that point, yeah, at that
Yeah,
point
like
you
don't use
have a
serverless. Like
choice.
use maybe you've got containers. Well, use containers, or maybe use create it like there's just like a web app in like Elastic Beanstalk or Amplify or whatever.
Mhm. Awesome. So I have some Amazon slash your job specific questions here.
Yeah.
um, Adam Jackson would like to know, what does your team do specifically?
Okay. So the
What do
team
you?
I'm on is the startup team, and we work with startups. So AWS is the B2B cloud computing company within all of Amazon. So that means is that uh, we focus on helping startups
Hmm.
build and scale their business.
Nice.
So what that means is that um, I'll have meetings with startups. They'll tell me what it is that they're trying to work on, what problem they're trying to figure out, um, and I'll it's kind of like it. Like if you think about an architect. An architect is the person who gives you like the blueprint of how it is that you're going to be able to build that building. They're not going to go in and like get the hammer and the nail and start like nailing in and like to actually build whatever the building is. But they have a higher idea of like what are the different tools you need to be able to build that building. So that's kind of what I think about. Like I think about what's the problem they're trying to solve, and what does the actual infrastructure look like that they need to be able to solve that problem. So it's the kind of job where like you like being technical, and you also like working with different companies. You like working with customers. Like I work with CTOs, directors of engineering, to other DevOps people, security, CISOs,
Mm.
of like startups. So yeah, so that's like the core portion of like of what it is that my team does. But we also do um, there's also other kinds of things that we do. So some of it is also creating content or like delivering tech talks
Mhm.
to the startup community, so they are more aware of like how they can be building and scaling their business.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think honestly that's really interesting for a lot of our members who are kind of in that space where they want to be engineers, they're technical, or they are engineers wherever they're at in their journey, but they also entrepreneurs, right? Like this is a position where they can learn about what it takes to create a startup and
Yeah.
see people or different companies in different spaces, right? And maybe learn from the position where you're sitting at, like talking to them through their technical problems of scale and realize like, maybe there's a bump in the road that I can live through vicariously by seeing these issues, So that I think that's really dope, man. That's not really like a position that we hear quite often,
Yeah.
like in the tech world. So I really like that. That's super
Yeah,
dope.
no, it is. Yeah. And like, especially there are a lot of people on the startup team who are that from that case. Like there are people who were startup founders and now, they now want to be able to use their knowledge to like help other startups be able to grow. There are also people who are on the team who like want to eventually have their own startup. And so they're there because they want to learn more about, startups. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we work with startups like all different sizes. So there's some who are like, if you're familiar with like the accelerator incubators, those are like the early stage. They're in like the Y Combinator, the Tech Stars. They're from universities who have like entrepreneurial like kind of hubs.
Mm-hmm.
And then like for me, I work with some of the more mature startups. But there's also like if you're someone who has you work with like enterprise like you work at like an enterprise company before or like a really big global company. There are also other teams that focus on working with those kinds of companies too. So there are other solutions architects that just work with like enterprises or just work with like small medium businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also like I know there was someone who was a machine learning specialist within the solutions architecture organization. There are also solutions architects that just focus on a technical domain, and which can be like AIML, it could be IoT, autonomous driving, like blockchain. So like if you're also someone who's like really wants to learn more about like the bleeding edge technology, you want to get hands-on with it, maybe actually develop any applications with it. Like it's a great place to be able to learn about it and like actually get hands-on. And part of what we do also is either we'll build demos for customers or we'll also just kind of build things that are either workshops or like art of the possible that we present at like conferences and stuff. So
All right. Dope. Dustin Maxwell, I think Jillian's referring to you with that ML comment. Sounds like you need to apply, man. So, uh, so there's another. Well, man, Adam Jackson really wants this job. He has another question. Any tips on making my resume stand out when applying to the AWS team?
okay, so the resume itself is less important, especially because of the keyword, the Webull Black. Recruiters are going to find your resume. Like they're looking for that keyword to find, anyone who comes from this event and make sure that they get kickstarted in the process. So what's more important for you is when you actually, are in the interview. And so what's really important with Amazon is Amazon's leadership principles. And other companies, they have like culture and values and in some companies it's like less important than others. They say it's important, but like it's not really important. Like and you're like, everyone knows it's not really important, but it's actually like crucial at AWS. Like it's a part of it, and especially in the hiring process. So they're going to be looking for you to show instances where like you're show that you had demonstrated the leadership principles. So some examples are like, when did you show bias for action? When did you have to like dive deep into a technical problem? When did you have to? One of them is disagree and commit. So was there a time where you like believed in something and you had to you disagreed with it, or maybe you had to stick for something that you really believed that you thought was right, and maybe you had to commit to the decision, but you actually made sure to at least express your opinion. So all the leadership principles are publicly available, and then once you're kickstarted in the recruiting process, the recruiter will send you an email and kind of walk you through like what are the leadership principles and like what are thinking about how you can like frame your answers. But I would start to think about like like what I did for my interview was like, okay, think about all like your best stories from your career. And obviously the more relevant recent stories, the better, that identify to the Amazon's leadership principles, and then just be ready to practice telling those stories. I do a lot of interviews at Amazon. So another thing that I can tell is what I see. One mistake I see people make in the interview process is they don't also will tell the result of what it is that they did. So they'll tell you like a story of like, oh, I like built this application. I was the engineer, I like built this, and they were, and it was great, or whatever. But they don't tell you like what was the impact, like, how much revenue did your application bring in, or how much did it save? And you don't have to say the numbers, but even if it's like increase in 70%, or like I saved the company some amount of dollars, like this application improved the efficiency of my team, whatever it is. Even if it's like, let's say, I don't know, you mentor someone and then as a result, they're more confident and now they've gone on to another job, or they got promoted or something. Like that's a result that will really help show that, that like really help hone in your story and just make you look much stronger.
Mhm. And I really want to piggyback on that just for everybody listening. That can apply not just to AWS, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, people like numbers, and it looks a lot more, what's the word that I'm looking for? I don't want to say like truthful, but official, because anybody can put anything on a resume, right? And when you have hard numbers and data to kind of back up what you're saying, and even if it's just something as simple as like, you know, Jillian, she has a lot of experience, and she has a lot to pull from in terms of those numbers, because it's a huge number like Amazon. But let's say you worked at a small company that didn't have a million data points that you can pull from. What you can say is, I built this feature and it affected XYZ number of users. Now, if you have different user personas, you can kind of break down how many people were actually in that user persona and say like, hey, I built this, it affected XYZ number of users, and we got a good amount of feedback from these people, right? It's just something that's tangible and lets them know that you're not just like a person on a team that's taking credit for somebody else's work. You can thoroughly explain what you built and how it affected your user base.
Yes, exactly. You said that so well, Devin. And I think one thing I'll add to that is that, like, also when you're telling your story, like when you're interviewing, I see a lot of people will like start to tell us like they worked on a team or like a group project, and they'll start to say like, we did this, and like, and they won't necessarily focus it on like, I did this, like this was the whatever the application or the project was, and I focus on building this feature or like whatever it was. Like those little distinctions are just really going to help the interviewer like see like what you've done and what your impact is, and help them evaluate you.
Yeah, absolutely. And even like you said, like those leadership qualities, right? Like it kind of shows that one, you did lead, and not necessarily always like leading a team, but like it's more so individual leadership. Like you took that extra step to figure out what was my impact,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with you there. And last question, because we are on 6 o'clock, and I don't want to hold you too long, but this one, I don't know if this will be solved a little bit easier with maybe a link and some information, but Mallory Casimir wants to know, can you go a bit into the pricing model if one decides to use EC2, Lambda, or Amplify, etc.?
So everything is pay as you go pricing. So and all the pricing is public. So I don't know the actual pricing itself. Like on the AWS pages for each service, they're all publicly listed, and like they depend on the actual region of the world that you're covering. But they're all pay as you go, and they're usually like based on a usage. So like like after a certain amount of usage, like it's a certain rate, and then once you break to like have another set of usage, it's like a certain rate per requests. That's basically how it works.
Awesome. Awesome. So
Oh,
I
and there's
think,
also, let me add, there's also a free tier too. So like if you're looking to like get started, there's a free tier to take advantage of. And even with serverless, I forget exactly what it is, but there's even, depending on the traffic, like when you're just getting started, you might be able to even just get away with like using Lambda and like running your application in production and it's still being under the free tier. So um, yeah.
okay, so I actually have some, you might have another customer slash client. It says, wait, how do I get an Amazon expert like Julian to come help me scale up my startup? How do we do that, Julian? Shameless plug.
Yeah. Oh my God. So there's a couple ways. So we have, depending on the city that you live in, we have these lofts called the AWS loft. There's one in New York City. I'm not sure when exactly it'll open. It's in Soho and it's free to go to. And every day they have an Ask the Architect bar. So you literally can just like walk up to the bar and there'll be like a solutions architect there, or maybe someone from support, and you just like ask them your question. And then it's also a co-working space, so a lot of people just go there and just like will do work and hang out. So that's a great place to also be able, if the company you work at isn't working with a solutions architect, that's a great way to be able to get started, to be able to work with a solutions architect.
All right, well, Mr. Top 10, that's how you get into contact with Julian. So I think that we're all out of time for now, but if anybody has any other questions, we might possibly keep working with Julian if she's got the time, hit us with some more workshops. So if there's anything, of interest that you feel like Julian can talk to us about, then, reach out and we'll get the conversation going. But in the meantime, Dustin, you wanted some of that ML information. I'll reach back out to Julian to get that. Dump that in the. Do we have an ML chat or an AI channel? AWS. I believe we have an AI channel.
All right.
And we'll get that to y'all. But in the meantime, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. This was a plethora of information. I'm sure there are so many people who've been watching this who are going to take it with them and integrate it into their projects. So hopefully we get to see you again in the future, Julian.
My pleasure. This has been so much fun. Have fun building, and like I can't wait to see you guys another time.
All right. You have a good day, Julian.
All right. You too, everyone. Have a good night.
Don't forget